The gunshot that shattered the morning calm of Salida, Colorado territory, sent Nora Bennett diving beneath the wooden platform outside the mercantile, her heart hammering against her ribs as she clutched her worn leather satchel to her chest. It was October 1878, and she had been in this dusty mountain town for only 3 days, barely enough time to understand its rhythms before violence reminded her that civilization was still a fragile thing in these parts. When the shouting subsided and cautious faces began appearing in doorways, Nora emerged from her hiding spot, her green calico dress covered in dust, her auburn hair tumbling loose from its pins. She had come west from St. Louis after her father's death 6 months prior, following the promise of teaching work in the growing settlements along the Arkansas River. At 22 years old, she had little left to lose and everything to gain. Her mother had died when she was 12, and her father, a printer by trade, had scraped together enough to give her a proper education before consumption claimed him. The small inheritance he left was enough for passage west and a few months of modest living, but not much more. Salida needed a schoolteacher, or so the advertisement had claimed, and Nora needed a fresh start far from the memories that haunted every corner of her old life. The gunfight, she learned quickly enough, had been over a card game. One man lay dead in the street, another had ridden off with a bullet in his shoulder, and the sheriff was questioning witnesses with the weary expression of someone who had seen this drama play out too many times before. Nora smoothed her dress and made her way toward the small boarding house where she had taken a room, her stomach growling to remind her that breakfast remained a pressing concern. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, had told her about the dining hall attached to the hotel on Front Street. It was not fancy, but the food was decent and the prices fair. Nora counted her remaining coins carefully before heading out that evening, determined to make every penny stretch as far as possible until she could secure her teaching position and receive her first payment. The dining hall was busier than she expected, filled with miners fresh from the surrounding hills, railroad workers whose labor was slowly connecting this mountain territory to the wider world, and cowboys who had driven cattle through the mountain passes. The air was thick with the smell of fried meat, tobacco smoke, and unwashed bodies. Nora found a small table near the back and ordered the cheapest item on the menu, a plate of beans, cornbread, and a small piece of salt pork. When her meal arrived, she looked at it with a mixture of gratitude and concern. It would fill her stomach tonight, but tomorrow remained uncertain. Her interview with the school board was not until the end of the week, and she had learned that morning that 2 other candidates had arrived to compete for the position. One was a man from Denver with teaching certificates, the other a widow from Kansas with 5 years of experience. Nora had enthusiasm and a genuine love of learning, but she was beginning to understand those qualities might not be enough. She was halfway through her meal when she noticed them. 2 children sitting on the floor near the kitchen entrance, not quite in the dining hall proper but close enough to catch the warmth from inside. A boy of perhaps 8 and a girl no older than 6, both painfully thin, both watching the diners with hollow, hungry eyes. Their clothes were little more than rags, and their faces bore the grime of street living. Nora set down her fork and looked at her plate. She was hungry too, genuinely hungry in a way she had rarely experienced in her old life. But she was an adult with options, however limited. These children had nothing. Without allowing herself time to reconsider, she stood and carried her plate toward them. The boy's eyes widened with suspicion and fear, as though expecting her to chase them away. Instead, she knelt down and offered the plate. "You look hungrier than I am," she said simply. "Please take it." The boy hesitated only a moment before grabbing the plate, and both children fell upon the food with desperate intensity. Nora felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. She returned to her table and sat down, her empty stomach protesting, but her conscience somewhat eased. She would find something else tomorrow. She always had before. She did not notice the man watching her from across the room until she stood to leave. He was sitting alone at a corner table, and when their eyes met, he nodded once, a gesture that seemed to carry both acknowledgement and approval. Nora felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. She had not given away her meal for recognition, and the attention made her uncomfortable. She hurried out into the cool October evening, pulling her thin shawl tight around her shoulders. The next morning brought a cold rain that turned Salida's streets into rivers of mud. Nora spent the day in her room at the boarding house, reviewing her lesson plans and rehearsing what she would say to the school board. Her stomach growled persistently, a hollow ache that made concentration difficult. She had found half a biscuit in her room from 2 days prior and made it last as long as possible, but it did little to satisfy her hunger. By evening, the rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and sharp with the promise of winter to come. Nora counted her remaining money and decided she could afford one more meal at the dining hall. This time she would eat every bite herself, she resolved. She could not afford such generosity again, regardless of who might be watching with empty eyes. The dining hall was less crowded tonight, perhaps because of the weather. Nora ordered the same meal as before and found an empty table against the wall. She had just picked up her fork when she heard a polite cough beside her. She looked up to find a tall man standing there, hat in his hands, his expression serious but not unkind. "Excuse me, miss," he said. "I hope you will not think me forward, but I wondered if you might join me at my table. I have ordered more food than one person should reasonably eat, and I would appreciate the company." Nora recognized him immediately as the man who had been watching her the previous night. In the better light of the dining hall, she could see he was perhaps 28 or 29, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and gray eyes that held both intelligence and something harder, something forged by experience. He wore the clothes of a working cowman, clean but well-worn denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest that had seen years of use. His boots were scuffed but well-maintained, and a gun belt hung low on his hips in the manner of someone who knew how to use it. "That is kind of you," Nora said carefully, "but I have already ordered my own meal." "Then bring it over," he said with a slight smile. "I noticed last night you gave your supper to those hungry children. I thought tonight you might allow someone to return the kindness, in a manner of speaking." Nora felt her face flush. "I did not do that for attention or reward." "I know," he said. "That is precisely why I am inviting you to share my table. True kindness does not advertise itself. My name is Owen Garrett, and I promise I am not trying to compromise your reputation or take advantage. I simply thought you might enjoy a full meal and perhaps some decent conversation." There was something in his direct gaze that convinced her of his sincerity. Perhaps it was foolish, but Nora found herself nodding and gathering her things to move to his table in the corner. Owen Garrett pulled out a chair for her with an old-fashioned courtesy that surprised her, then settled into his own seat with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin. "You are new to Salida," he observed. It was not quite a question. "I arrived 3 days ago," Nora confirmed. "From St. Louis originally, though I have been traveling for some weeks. My name is Nora Bennett." "A long journey," Owen said. "What brings you to this particular corner of Colorado territory?" "I hope to teach school here," Nora explained. "There was an advertisement back east for a teacher. I am waiting to interview with the school board." Owen nodded thoughtfully. A server arrived with his meal, and Nora's eyes widened slightly despite herself. He had not been exaggerating. There was a large steak, fried potatoes, beans, cornbread, and even a slice of apple pie. When her own modest plate arrived, Owen immediately began dividing his food, placing half the steak and a generous portion of everything else onto a spare plate and sliding it toward her. "Please," he said when she began to protest. "I work as a foreman on a cattle ranch about 10 miles north of town. The work is physical, and I eat well most days. You, I think, have not eaten well recently." Nora wanted to maintain her pride, to insist she could manage on her own, but her treacherous stomach chose that moment to growl audibly. Owen pretended not to notice, busying himself with cutting his steak. With as much dignity as she could muster, Nora accepted the offered food and took a bite of the tender meat. It tasted like heaven. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Owen spoke again. "Those children you fed last night, they are orphans. Their parents died of fever last spring. The town has tried to find someone to take them in, but times are hard. Most families have enough trouble feeding their own." "What will happen to them?" Nora asked, distressed. Owen's expression darkened. "Eventually, they will likely be sent to an orphanage in Denver if one has space. Or they will survive on the streets until they are old enough to work or until the winter cold becomes too much. It is not right, but it is the way of things out here. Life is hard and kindness is a luxury many feel they cannot afford." "That is a terrible philosophy," Nora said sharply. "I agree," Owen replied, meeting her eyes directly. "Which is why what you did last night mattered. Small acts of decency matter even when they feel insignificant." They talked through the rest of the meal, an easy conversation that surprised Nora with its comfort. Owen told her he had grown up in Texas, the son of a ranch hand who died when Owen was 15. He had worked his way north over the years, taking jobs on various ranches, learning the cattle business from the ground up. 2 years ago, he had come to work for Samuel Harrison, who owned one of the larger spreads in the valley. Owen had proven himself capable and trustworthy, earning the position of foreman and the respect that came with it. In turn, Nora shared her own story. Her father's death, her decision to seek a new life in the West, her hopes of making a difference through teaching. Owen listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and never once making her feel foolish for her ambitions. When the meal was finished and the plates cleared away, Owen leaned back in his chair and studied her for a moment. "Miss Bennett, I know we have only just met, but I would like to make a proposal. Nothing improper," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "Tomorrow evening, would you allow me to buy you dinner again, and perhaps the evening after that if you are willing? I find I very much enjoy your company, and I suspect you could use at least a few good meals before your interview." Nora should have said no. She knew the proper response was to thank him politely and decline, to maintain the appropriate distance between a single woman and a man she barely knew. But there was something about Owen Garrett that quieted her usual caution. Perhaps it was the genuine respect in his eyes, or the way he spoke to her as an equal rather than a delicate creature to be patronized. Perhaps it was simply that she was lonely and frightened and grateful for a friendly face in this strange new place. "I would like that," she heard herself say, "but only if you allow me to repay the kindness somehow once I am established. I do not wish to be a charity case." "You could never be that," Owen said firmly. "But if it eases your mind, perhaps once you are settled, you might occasionally share a meal with a lonely cowman who values intelligent conversation. That seems a fair exchange." And so began a pattern that continued through the remainder of that week. Each evening, Nora would make her way to the dining hall and Owen would be there, inviting her to join him at his table. They talked about everything and nothing, books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they harbored. Owen admitted he hoped to own his own ranch someday, a smaller spread where he could raise quality horses alongside cattle. Nora shared her vision of a schoolhouse filled with eager students, of helping children discover the joy of learning and the power of knowledge. On the third evening, Owen asked about her family. Nora told him about her mother, dead these 10 years, and her father, who had tried his best to be both parents after her loss. "He encouraged my education," she said softly. He believed women deserved the same opportunities as men, which was not a popular opinion among many of his peers. "He taught me to think for myself, to question, to never accept limitations simply because society deemed them appropriate." "He sounds like a remarkable man," Owen said. "You must miss him terribly." "Every day," Nora admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. She had not spoken so openly about her grief with anyone since leaving St. Louis. "But I think he would approve of what I am trying to do here." He always said the West represented possibility, a chance to build something better than what existed back East. "The West has possibility," Owen agreed. "But it is also unforgiving. Beauty and brutality exist side by side out here. You have to be strong to survive, but you also have to hold on to your humanity. That is the difficult balance." On Friday, Nora attended her interview with the school board. She wore her best dress, a dark blue wool that she had pressed carefully, and pinned her hair up in a style she hoped looked both professional and approachable. The interview took place in the back room of the general store, conducted by 5 men who looked at her with varying degrees of skepticism. They asked about her education, her experience, her disciplined philosophy. Nora answered as honestly and confidently as she could, but she could see the doubt in their eyes. The man from Denver had certificates from an established teaching college. The widow from Kansas had years of proven experience. Nora had enthusiasm and determination, qualities that seemed suddenly flimsy in the face of such concrete credentials. When the interview concluded, the head of the school board, a banker named Thomas Wright, told her they would make their decision by the following Wednesday. Nora thanked them and left, trying to maintain her composure until she was safely outside. Only then did she allow herself to acknowledge the sinking feeling in her stomach. She had not gotten the position. She knew it with a certainty that made her eyes sting with unshed tears. That evening, she considered not going to the dining hall. Pride suggested she should spare Owen the task of comforting her through her disappointment. But loneliness and hunger won out over pride, and she found herself walking through the door just as the sun was setting behind the Sawatch Mountains. Owen took one look at her face and understood. He did not offer platitudes or false hope. Instead, he ordered a large meal and listened while she poured out her frustration and fear. "They are going to choose the man from Denver," she said miserably. "I could see it in their faces, and what will I do then? I have enough money for perhaps another 2 weeks if I am very careful. Then I will have to return east with my tail between my legs, a failed adventurer who could not make it in the West. Or," Owen said carefully, "you could stay in Salida and find another way to make a life here." Nora shook her head. "Doing what? There are no positions for women beyond laundry and mending, and those jobs are already filled by those who need them more desperately than I do. I will not take work from someone else who has no other options." Owen was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. Finally, he said, "Miss Bennett, I have a proposition for you. Please hear me out completely before you respond." Something in his tone made Nora sit up straighter. "I am listening." "We have known each other only a few days," Owen began. "But in that time, I have come to admire you greatly. Your kindness, your intelligence, your determination to maintain your principles even when it would be easier to compromise them. You are unlike any woman I have met, and I find myself thinking about you constantly when I should be focused on my work." Nora's heart began to beat faster, though she was not entirely sure why. Owen continued, his words coming more quickly now, as though he feared losing his nerve. "I am not a rich man, but I have steady employment and a good reputation. I have saved my wages carefully, and I have prospects. In another year or two, I will have enough to make an offer on a piece of land and start my own operation. What I do not have is someone to share that life with, someone who understands that building something worthwhile requires both strength and compassion." He reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm around hers. "Miss Bennett, Nora, would you consider marrying me? I know it is sudden, and I know you have every reason to think me mad for asking. But I believe we could build a good life together. You could still teach, perhaps not in a formal schoolhouse at first, but the children on the surrounding ranches need education. We could make that happen together. And in time, when we have our own children, you could teach them everything your father taught you about thinking freely and questioning the world." Nora stared at him, stunned into silence. Marriage. He was proposing marriage to her, a woman he had known for less than a week. It was insane. It was impulsive. It was completely contrary to every cautious, practical instinct she possessed. It was also, she realized with startling clarity, exactly what she wanted. "Owen," she said slowly, "you barely know me. What if I prove to be shrewish or lazy or impossibly difficult to live with?" "Then we will work through it," he said simply. "What if I prove to have terrible habits or a tendency to snore or a complete inability to appreciate poetry?" Despite herself, Nora smiled. "Do you snore?" "I have no idea," he admitted. "I have never had the opportunity to ask anyone." "Do you have terrible habits?" "I talk to myself when I am working through a problem," Nora confessed. "And I can become completely absorbed in a book and forget to eat or sleep. And I have very strong opinions about many things, which I do not always keep to myself as society suggests I should." "None of those sound like flaws to me," Owen said. "They sound like the qualities of an interesting person I would very much like to spend my life getting to know better." Nora felt tears spring to her eyes, but this time they were not born of frustration or fear. "My father used to say that the greatest adventure is building a life with someone who shares your values, even if you do not always agree on the details. He said love is not about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone worth working through the imperfections with." "Your father was a wise man," Owen said softly. "What do you think he would say about this wild cowboy who is proposing marriage after knowing his daughter for less than a week?" Nora thought about that seriously. Her father had been a romantic beneath his practical exterior, a man who had loved her mother with a devotion that transcended the practical considerations of life. He had taught Nora to trust her instincts, to recognize goodness when she encountered it, and to have the courage to seize opportunities even when they came in unexpected forms. "I think," she said slowly, "he would tell me to trust my heart but keep my eyes open. To move forward with both hope and wisdom." "And what is your heart telling you?" Owen asked. Nora looked at this man who had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return, who had seen her at her lowest and offered not pity but respect. She thought about the easy conversations they had shared, the way his presence made her feel both comfortable and exhilarated. She thought about the alternative, returning east to an empty life, teaching in a school where she would always be reminded of her failure, living with relatives who would view her Western adventure as a foolish mistake. And she thought about the possibility Owen was offering, a partnership, a shared life, the chance to build something meaningful together in this raw, beautiful land. "My heart is telling me to say yes," Nora whispered. "If you are truly certain this is what you want." Owen's face broke into a wide smile, transforming his usually serious expression into something radiant. "I am more certain of this than I have been of anything in my entire life. We will figure out the details together. That is what partners do." They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house served as Nora's witness, her eyes misty with romantic sentiment. Owen's boss, Samuel Harrison, stood up for him, his weathered face creased with approval. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when Owen kissed his bride for the first time, Nora felt a rush of joy so intense it took her breath away. She moved her few belongings from the boarding house to a small cabin Owen rented on the edge of Salida. It was modest, just 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, but it was clean and sturdy. Owen had furnished it with simple but well-made pieces. A bed frame he had built himself, a table and chairs purchased from a carpenter in town, a rocking chair that had belonged to his mother. The cabin sat on a small piece of land with a view of the mountains, and Nora fell in love with it immediately. That first night as husband and wife, they sat together on the cabin's small porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Nora leaned against Owen's shoulder, marveling at how quickly her life had transformed. A week ago, she had been alone and frightened, uncertain of her future. Now she had a husband, a home, and the beginning of a new life that felt both terrifying and wonderful. "Are you frightened?" Owen asked softly as though reading her thoughts. "A little," Nora admitted, "but also excited." "Is that strange?" "Not at all," Owen said. "I feel the same way. We are taking a leap of faith, you and I, but I think it will prove to be the best decision either of us has ever made." He was right, though neither of them could have predicted exactly how their life together would unfold. The first months of marriage brought adjustments, as Nora learned the rhythms of ranch life and Owen learned to share his space with another person. There were moments of frustration when habits clashed or expectations proved unrealistic. Nora discovered Owen did indeed snore, though only when he was particularly exhausted. Owen learned that Nora's tendency to become absorbed in thought meant she sometimes burned dinner or forgot to bank the fire properly. But beneath the small frictions of daily life, something deeper was growing. The respect they had felt from the beginning deepened into genuine affection, and then into love. Owen showed his feelings through actions rather than flowery words, rising early to start the fire so Nora would wake to a warm house, bringing her interesting books from town, listening attentively when she shared her thoughts on education and philosophy. Nora expressed her love through the care she put into their home, the way she waited up for him when his work kept him late, and the fierce defense she offered whenever anyone questioned his judgment or abilities. The physical aspect of their marriage developed gradually, with a tenderness that surprised them both. Neither had much experience, but they learned together, discovering pleasure in the connection they were building. Owen was patient and gentle, always concerned for Nora's comfort and happiness. Nora, in turn, shed the inhibitions that had been ingrained in her by her Eastern upbringing, finding freedom in the privacy of their small cabin and the security of Owen's devotion. Winter came early that year, blanketing the mountains in snow and testing the limits of their small cabin's defenses against the cold. Owen worked long hours helping to move cattle to lower pastures and ensuring the ranch was prepared for the harsh months ahead. Nora spent her days keeping the cabin warm, preparing meals, and beginning to reach out to families in the surrounding area about tutoring their children, Her first students were the 3 children of a rancher named Douglas Miller, whose spread adjoined Samuel Harrison's land. The Miller children ranged in age from 7 to 12, and they were hungry for knowledge in a way that delighted Nora's teacher's heart. 3 times a week, she would bundle up against the cold and ride the gentle mare Owen had acquired for her, making the hour-long journey to the Miller ranch to conduct lessons. Word of her teaching spread, and by January, Nora had 6 more students from 3 different families. The parents paid what they could, some in coin, others in goods: eggs, butter, preserved vegetables, firewood. It was not the formal schoolhouse position Nora had dreamed of, but it was teaching, and it was making a difference. She was passing on knowledge, opening minds, and helping to build the foundation of education in this wild, rough country. On a particularly cold evening in February, Owen came home with unexpected news. "Samuel wants to expand the horse breeding operation," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "He has asked me to take charge of it. It means more responsibility, but also a significant increase in pay. And he has offered to sell me a section of his land at a favorable price when I am ready to strike out on my own." Nora threw her arms around him, thrilled by this recognition of his skills and dedication. "Owen, that is wonderful. When will this begin?" "Spring," he said, returning her embrace, "which gives us a few months to plan. Nora, if this works out as I hope, we could have our own place within 2 years. A real ranch with a proper house, room for children, and for you to potentially establish a more formal school." Children. They had not spoken much about that topic, though it hung unspoken between them. Nora was 23 now, Owen 30. They both wanted a family, but they had also been content to let things develop naturally, without pressure or expectation. "I would like that very much," Nora said softly. "All of it. Our own place, children to raise and teach, building something that will outlast us." That night they lay together in their narrow bed, Owen's arms around Nora as the wind howled outside. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Marrying me so quickly, giving up your dream of teaching in a real school?" Nora turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek. "Not for a single moment. You gave me something better than I was searching for, Owen. You gave me a true partnership, a chance to build a life on my own terms rather than fitting into someone else's vision of what I should be. That is worth more than any formal teaching position could ever be." "You have given me the same gift," Owen said, his voice rough with emotion. "I was existing before I met you, going through the motions of life. You made me remember what it feels like to truly live, to have something beyond work and survival to care about." They kissed then, a slow, deep kiss that led to lovemaking that was both passionate and tender. Afterwards, wrapped in each other's arms beneath layers of quilts, Nora felt a contentment so complete it brought tears to her eyes. This was what her father had meant about finding someone worth building a life with. This feeling of absolute belonging, of being truly seen and valued and loved. Spring arrived in late March, bringing mud and wildflowers in equal measure. Owen threw himself into the horse breeding project, working long days but returning home each evening with stories of progress and possibility. Samuel Harrison had acquired several fine mares, and a stallion with excellent bloodlines. If they could produce quality horses and build a reputation for their stock, the financial rewards could be substantial. Nora continued her teaching, expanding her roster to 10 students as word spread of her abilities. She was also beginning to feel the first stirrings of a suspicion that brought both joy and nervousness. Her monthly courses had not arrived in April, and certain morning activities had become decidedly unpleasant. She waited until she was certain before saying anything to Owen, not wanting to raise hopes prematurely. In May, she could no longer deny the truth. She was pregnant, carrying their first child. The news would change everything, requiring new plans and new considerations. On a warm evening when Owen came home to find her waiting on the porch, she stood and took his hands. "I have something to tell you," she said, searching his face. Something wonderful and terrifying in equal measure. Understanding dawned in Owen's eyes, followed by a joy so intense it seemed to radiate from him. "Truly," he breathed. "We are having a child," Nora nodded, laughing as he swept her up in his arms and spun her around, whooping with delight. When he set her down, he immediately began fussing over her, insisting she sit, asking if she felt well, wondering what she needed. "I need you to stop treating me like I am made of glass," Nora said, amused by his sudden protectiveness. "I am pregnant, not ill. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." But she was touched by his concern, by the way his hand kept reaching out to rest gently on her still flat stomach, as though already trying to connect with the child growing there. They talked late into the night about names and possibilities, about how they would manage childcare while still maintaining their work, about the kind of parents they hoped to be. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Nora continued teaching until July, when the heat and her expanding belly made the long rides to the various ranches too uncomfortable. Her students gave her a touching farewell, each contributing something to a gift basket for the coming baby. Tiny knitted garments, wooden toys, a beautiful cradle blanket that one mother had sewn. Owen's horse breeding project was exceeding expectations. The first foals born that spring showed tremendous promise, and buyers were already making inquiries about future stock. Samuel Harrison was so pleased he had drawn up preliminary papers for the land sale, offering Owen even more favorable terms than originally discussed. In September, as the aspen leaves turned gold in the mountains and the air carried the first hint of autumn, Nora went into labor. Mrs. Patterson, who had midwifed dozens of births in her years in Salida, attended her. Owen paced outside the cabin, his face pale with worry, until Mrs. Patterson finally called him in to meet his son. The baby was small but healthy, with a shock of dark hair and gray eyes that would eventually change to match his mother's warm brown. They named him James after Nora's father, giving him the middle name of Samuel in honor of Owen's employer and friend. Holding his son for the first time, Owen wept unashamedly. "He is perfect," he whispered, touching the baby's tiny fingers. "Nora, look what we made. Look at this perfect little person." Nora, exhausted but glowing with happiness, watched her husband cradle their son. This moment, she thought, was worth every risk they had taken, every leap of faith that had brought them to this point. James yawned and stretched, already making his presence known in the small cabin that suddenly felt even more like a home. The first months with a newborn tested them in ways they had not anticipated. Sleep became a precious commodity, snatched in short intervals between feedings and diaper changes. The cabin that had seemed cozy now felt cramped with the addition of a cradle, washing hung to dry, and all the paraphernalia that accompanied infant care. But even in the most exhausting moments, there was joy. James's first smile, directed at Owen, made his father grin like a fool for days. The way the baby would quiet at the sound of Nora's voice, even in his fussiest moments, filled her with a fierce maternal love she had not known possible. By the time James was 6 months old, Owen had saved enough money to purchase the land from Samuel Harrison. It was 200 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it, about 5 miles north of Salida. Owen spent every spare moment that winter drawing up plans for their house, consulting with Nora about what she wanted and needed. She sketched out a large kitchen where she could cook and can and eventually teach James to read. He added a separate room that could serve as both his office and, eventually, a schoolroom for their children and any others in the area who wanted learning. Construction began in early spring of 1880, as soon as the ground thawed enough to break. Owen hired 3 men to help with the heavy work, and together they spent weeks laying the foundation, raising walls and constructing a roof that would withstand the mountain weather. It was not a mansion, but it was substantial. 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen and dining area, a front room for gathering, and the office space Owen had promised. They moved in on a bright June day when James was 9 months old and trying valiantly to crawl. Nora walked through each room, touching walls and windows, marveling at the reality of what they had built. This was their home, bought and paid for with Owen's labor and determination. These were rooms where their family would grow, where children would learn and play, where love would be the foundation of everything. That first night in the new house, after James was asleep in his cradle, Owen and Nora stood on the front porch, looking out at the land that was now theirs. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Owen's arm was around Nora's waist, and she leaned into his solid warmth. "Sometimes I cannot believe this is real," she said softly. "That I went from having nothing, being so frightened and alone, to having all of this. You, James, this beautiful home. It feels like a dream." "If it is a dream, I hope we never wake up," Owen replied, "though I suspect the reality is better than any dream could be. Dreams do not include spit up on your favorite shirt or being woken at 3 in the morning by a crying baby." Nora laughed. "But they also do not include the way James laughs when you toss him in the air, or the feeling of accomplishment when we look at what we have built together. The messy reality is far better than any sanitized dream." Over the next few years, they built more than just a house and a horse breeding operation. They built a life rich with purpose and connection. Owen's reputation for quality horses spread throughout Colorado territory, bringing buyers from as far away as Denver and even a few from out of state. The income allowed them to hire help, taking some of the physical burden off Owen and giving him more time to spend with his family. Nora resumed teaching, starting with James once he was old enough to begin learning his letters, then gradually taking on other students. By 1882, she had a dozen children coming to the house 3 days a week for lessons. She charged modest fees, adjusted based on what families could afford, and found immense satisfaction in shaping young minds. Several of her students showed real academic promise, and she made sure they had access to advanced materials, corresponding with educators back east to obtain textbooks and lesson plans. In the spring of 1883, Nora discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news brought less nervousness and more pure joy. They knew what to expect now, how to manage the demands of an infant while maintaining their work and family life. James, now 3½, was excited about becoming a big brother, though his understanding of what that actually meant was charmingly vague. Their daughter was born in October, arriving with considerably less drama than James's birth. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's gray eyes, and they named her Caroline, called Carrie from the start. If possible, Owen was even more besotted with his daughter than he had been with his son, terrified by her tiny fragility and determined to protect her from every possible harm. "She is going to have you wrapped around her little finger," Nora observed with amusement, watching Owen cradle his sleeping daughter with an expression of absolute devotion. "As do you," Owen replied without a trace of embarrassment. I seem to be entirely at the mercy of the women in my life, and I find I have no desire to change that situation. Life settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and dynamic. The horse operation continued to grow, with Owen eventually hiring 2 full-time ranch hands to help with the daily work. This allowed him to focus more on the breeding program and business management, using his mind as much as his physical labor. Nora's teaching expanded to include evening classes for adults. Ranch hands and their wives, who had never learned to read and write, but now wanted those skills. James grew into a bright, inquisitive boy who loved both the ranch work and his studies, never quite content unless he was learning something new. Carrie was more reserved, a thoughtful child who would sit for hours with picture books, making up elaborate stories based on the illustrations. Watching his children grow and develop their own personalities gave Owen a profound sense of accomplishment that surpassed even his pride in the successful ranch. In 1885, when James was 6 and Carrie nearly 2, Nora approached Owen with an idea. "I have been thinking," she said one evening after the children were in bed. "There are enough families in this area now that we could establish a proper school, not just lessons in our house, but an actual schoolhouse where children could come year-round. I have written to the Territorial Education Board, and they have indicated they would provide some funding if we can demonstrate community support." Owen listened as she outlined her vision. A one-room schoolhouse that could accommodate 20 or more students, a bell tower, a small library area. It would require investment and effort, but it could serve the growing community around Salida for years to come. How much would it cost? Owen asked practically. Nora showed him the figures she had calculated. It was a substantial sum, but not impossible. Owen studied the numbers, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, he looked up at his wife, her face animated with passion for this project, and he smiled. "Let us do it," he said simply. "We have been blessed with success. It seems right to invest some of those blessings back into the community. And I love seeing you like this, so excited and full of purpose. If this is what you want, then we will make it happen." The schoolhouse became a community project. Owen donated the land and much of the materials. Other ranchers contributed labor and supplies. Even the children helped, carrying small loads of stone for the foundation and sweeping out the structure as it took shape. By the fall of 1886, the schoolhouse stood complete. A beautiful structure with large windows to let in light, a pot-bellied stove for warmth, rows of desks that Owen had built himself, and a small bell tower that could be heard for miles across the valley. The Territorial Education Board was so impressed, they not only provided the promised funding, but also officially designated Nora as the school's teacher, complete with a small salary. She had finally achieved her original dream of being a schoolteacher, but in a way that was far more meaningful than the position she had originally sought in Salida. This was her school, born from her vision, and made real by her partnership with Owen and the support of their community. The schoolhouse opened with 18 students that first year, including James. Nora taught all grades together, differentiating instruction based on ability and age. It was exhausting work, but she loved every moment of it. Seeing her students grow in knowledge and confidence, watching shy children blossom into eager learners, knowing she was making a tangible difference in their lives and futures gave her a sense of purpose that filled her completely. In the spring of 1887, Nora discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was more difficult than the previous two, with persistent nausea and fatigue that made teaching challenging. Owen worried constantly, but Nora refused to give up her work, insisting she would continue as long as she was physically able. Her students rallied around her, the older ones helping with the younger children, everyone being especially attentive and well-behaved. Their second son was born in December, arriving early and struggling more than his siblings had. For 3 terrifying days, it was unclear whether the baby would survive. Nora was weak from a difficult labor, and Owen felt helpless, able only to pray and wait. But the baby, whom they named Thomas after Owen's father, proved stronger than he appeared. He began to nurse more vigorously. His color improved, and by the end of the first week, the immediate danger had passed. Thomas's difficult start made them all the more precious to his parents. Owen developed an especially close bond with his youngest son, perhaps because he had come so close to losing him. As Thomas grew, it became clear he had his father's temperament, steady, observant, and surprisingly stubborn despite his small size. The late 1880s brought significant changes to Colorado. In 1889, Colorado achieved statehood, transforming from territory to full member of the United States. Salida celebrated with a parade and festival, and Owen's family attended, proud to be part of this historic moment. James, now 9 years old, was fascinated by the political speeches and asked his parents endless questions about government and law. Carrie, at 6, was more interested in the music and dancing. Thomas, not yet 2, mostly wanted to chase the dogs that ran through the crowd. That year also brought more personal changes. Samuel Harrison, now in his 70s, decided to retire and sell his ranch. He offered Owen first option to purchase, but the price was steep, even for Owen's successful operation. After much discussion, Owen decided against it. Their own spread was large enough for their needs and growing larger than he could comfortably manage. Instead, he recommended a young rancher named Peter Cole, who he had mentored over the past several years. Peter purchased the Harrison Ranch, and Samuel moved to Denver to live with his daughter. Before leaving, Samuel came to dinner at Owen and Nora's home one last time. Over apple pie that Nora had made, he looked at Owen with obvious pride. "You know, when you first came to work for me, I saw potential in you, but I never imagined you would accomplish all this. You have built something remarkable here, Owen. A successful business, a beautiful family, a real contribution to this community. Your father would have been proud." Owen, not usually given to displays of emotion, had tears in his eyes. "I would not have any of this without you, Samuel. You gave me a chance when I was just another drifter cowboy. You taught me what it meant to build something lasting." "I gave you an opportunity," Samuel corrected, "but you made it into something more through your own hard work and integrity. And you," he turned to Nora, "you have been his equal partner in all of this. Not many women could have adapted to this life as you have, bringing Eastern education and refinement to the rough West without losing your essential goodness. Together, you two have created something special." After Samuel left, headed for his new life in Denver, Owen and Nora sat together on their porch, a ritual that had remained constant through all their years together. The children were asleep inside, safe and warm. The ranch was quiet, the horses settled in the barn. Stars filled the huge western sky, bright and cold. "You remember that first night I invited you to share my table?" Owen asked, taking Nora's hand. "Of course," Nora said. "I was so nervous and proud, trying to decide whether to accept your offer or maintain my independence." "I am grateful every day that you chose to accept," Owen said softly. "Everything good in my life flows from that decision. You gave me a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. You made me a better man." "You did the same for me," Nora replied, squeezing his hand. "When I think about who I was when I arrived in Salida, so frightened and uncertain, barely able to feed myself. And then I think about who I am now. A wife, a mother, a teacher with my own school. I could never have imagined this life, but I cannot imagine any other. We have been lucky, Owen observed. Not just in finding each other, but in the opportunities that have come our way. The success of the horse breeding, the schoolhouse, the children's health despite Thomas's rough start. We have been blessed. Luck and blessings, certainly, Nora agreed. But also hard work and good choices. We could have squandered our opportunities. Instead, we built on them together. The 1890s brought continued growth and change. The school expanded to accommodate 25 students, requiring Nora to hire an assistant teacher, a young woman named Ruth Carson, who had recently arrived from Kansas. James, now a teenager, showed increasing interest in the business side of the ranch, working alongside his father during summer months and absorbing everything Owen could teach him about breeding, training, and selling horses. Carrie proved to be musically talented, with a beautiful singing voice that entranced everyone who heard it. Owen managed to purchase a piano from a family leaving Salida, and Nora taught Carrie to play, drawing on her own childhood lessons. Soon, their home was regularly filled with music, Carrie's clear soprano accompanied by her mother on piano or her own playing. Thomas, always the most independent of the children, developed a fascination with books that surpassed even his mother's childhood love of reading. By age 7, he was reading at a level far beyond his years, devouring every book in the school's small library and begging for more. Owen made a special trip to Denver and returned with a trunk full of books, everything from adventure stories to natural science texts. Thomas devoured them all, often reading late into the night by lamplight until Owen would gently remove the book and insist he sleep. In 1893, the country experienced a financial panic that rippled across the West. Several banks failed, including one in Salida, where some local ranchers had kept their savings. The Garrett family was not directly affected, as Owen had always been conservative with money, keeping most of their savings in a strongbox at home rather than trusting entirely to financial institutions. But they saw friends and neighbors struggle, some losing their ranches, others forced to drastically reduce their operations. Owen and Nora responded by quietly helping where they could. They hired additional workers, providing jobs when employment was scarce. They purchased cattle and equipment from struggling ranchers at fair prices, providing those families with the cash they needed to stay afloat. And when several families could no longer afford to pay for their children's schooling, Nora silently removed their names from the account books, teaching their children for free while claiming they had worked out alternate payment arrangements. Their generosity did not go unnoticed. In the tight-knit community that had grown up around Salida, the Garrett family earned a reputation not just for success, but for integrity and compassion. When times were hard, people knew they could turn to Owen and Nora for help without facing judgment or exploitation. It was a reputation that brought its own rewards, as loyalty and goodwill proved valuable in ways that transcended mere money. James turned 18 in 1894, officially becoming a man in the eyes of the law. He had grown tall like his father, with Owen's dark hair and Nora's brown eyes, and he had inherited the best qualities of both parents. Owen's steady work ethic and practical wisdom, Nora's quick mind and genuine interest in others. Owen offered to make him a full partner in the ranch operation, recognizing that James had earned the position through years of hard work and demonstrated capability. The partnership proved beneficial for everyone. James brought fresh ideas and energy to the business, while Owen's experience provided important grounding. Together, they expanded the operation, purchasing additional land and diversifying beyond just horses to include a cattle operation as well. The additional income provided security, ensuring that one bad year in either horses or cattle would not devastate the family finances. Carrie, now 13, was beginning to attract attention from young men in the area, much to Owen's consternation. He had known this day would come, but he was not prepared for the reality of cowboys and ranchers' sons suddenly finding excuses to visit the ranch. Nora found his protective instincts amusing, though she understood them. Their daughter was becoming a beautiful young woman, and the world held dangers that every father feared. "You cannot lock her away," Nora told Owen gently after he had been particularly brusque with a young man who had come calling. "She needs to learn to navigate the world, including interactions with young men. We have raised her well. Trust that she has the judgment to make good choices." "I do trust her," Owen grumbled. "It is every young man within 50 miles I do not trust." "I remember being that age, remember the thoughts that went through my head." "And yet you were always respectful toward me," Nora pointed out. "Even when we had only just met. Good men exist, Owen. We just need to help Carrie recognize them when she encounters them." Thomas, at 10, was still more interested in books than in anything else, though he also showed a surprising talent for training horses. He had infinite patience with the animals, a quiet confidence that the horses responded to instinctively. Owen began teaching him more advanced training techniques, pleased to have another member of the family interested in this aspect of the business. In 1896, electricity began arriving in some parts of Colorado, though the rural areas around Salida would be without power for years yet. Still, the pace of change was accelerating, bringing new technologies and new possibilities. James traveled to Denver for a cattlemen's convention and returned full of ideas about new breeding techniques and marketing strategies. Carrie begged for a bicycle after seeing one in town, insisting it would revolutionize transportation. Thomas wanted a camera, fascinated by the idea of capturing images permanently. Owen and Nora tried to balance embrace of progress with preservation of the values that had served them well. They were willing to adopt new methods when they made sense, but they refused to be swept away by every fad and novelty. The core of their life remained unchanged: family, hard work, education, community, and faith in each other. As the century drew toward its close, Owen and Nora were now in their 40s, married for nearly 20 years. Their bodies showed the wear of those years. Owen's back sometimes ached after long days of physical labor. Nora's eyes strained more quickly when reading by lamplight. But they were healthy and strong, still deeply in love, still partners in every sense of the word. On a cool evening in October 1898, they celebrated their 19th wedding anniversary. The children had conspired to prepare a special dinner, with James overseeing the cooking, Carrie providing musical entertainment, and Thomas reading aloud a poem he had written for the occasion. After the meal, the children diplomatically excused themselves, leaving their parents alone on the porch to watch the sunset. 19 years, Nora mused. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like we were just married yesterday. Both are true, I think, Owen said. We have lived an entire life together in these 19 years. Built a ranch, raised children, established a school, but the feeling I have when I look at you is the same as it was that first night in the dining hall. Actually, that is not quite true. It is deeper now, richer. There is so much more to love. Nora leaned against him, comfortable and content. Do you remember what you said when you proposed? You said you believed we could build a good life together. I think we have exceeded even your optimistic expectations. We have, Owen agreed. And we are not done yet. There is still more life to live, more to build, grandchildren to spoil eventually, the ranch to continue growing, your school to expand, years of mornings waking up beside you, years of evenings watching the sun set over our land. That sounds perfect, Nora whispered. All of it. As the new century approached, the Garrett family found themselves in the rare position of being prosperous and content. The ranch was well established, the children were healthy and happy, and Owen and Nora's partnership continued to be the foundation on which everything else rested. They had weathered difficulties and celebrated triumphs, always together, always supporting each other. In the spring of 1900, James announced his engagement to Sarah Miller, the daughter of the rancher whose children had been Nora's first students years earlier. Owen and Nora approved wholeheartedly. Sarah was a capable, intelligent young woman who clearly loved James and shared his vision for the future. The wedding took place in June, a joyous celebration that brought the community together. Watching his son marry, standing beside the woman who had been his partner for more than 2 decades, Owen felt a profound sense of completion. They had done it. They had built the life they had hoped for, raised children who were becoming remarkable adults, created something lasting that would continue beyond themselves. "What are you thinking?" Nora asked softly, reading the emotion in his face. "I am thinking about that cowboy who saw a woman giving away her dinner to hungry children," Owen said quietly. "I am thinking about how he gathered his courage to invite her to his table, how terrified he was that she would refuse. I am thinking about how that single decision led to all of this." He gestured at the scene before them. James and Sarah dancing their first dance as husband and wife, Carrie singing while Thomas accompanied her on the piano they had acquired for him as well, friends and family celebrating together. "I am thinking the same thing," Nora admitted. About the frightened young woman who was ready to give up on her dreams, about the moment she decided to trust a kind stranger's invitation, about how that choice changed everything. "I told you that first night I wanted to invite you to my table forever," Owen said. "I meant it then, and I mean it even more now. Forever is not long enough, Nora. I want more time than that to spend loving you." Nora's eyes filled with tears. After all these years, he could still move her to tears with his simple, heartfelt words. "You have me for as long as we are both given. And I promise to make every day of that time count." The years continued to unfold, bringing more changes and more joys. Sarah gave birth to Owen and Nora's first grandchild in 1901, a boy they named David. Holding his grandson for the first time, Owen was transported back to the moment he had first held James, that same overwhelming mixture of love and terror and wonder. Nora, as a grandmother, was patient and doting, delighting in being able to cuddle and play without the full-time responsibility of infant care. Carrie married in 1903 to a banker from Salida named Robert Hayes, a steady young man who appreciated her musical talents and supported her desire to continue singing and teaching music. They settled in town, close enough to visit frequently but far enough to establish their own life. Thomas, now a young man himself, surprised everyone by announcing his intention to attend university in Denver, the first member of the family to pursue higher education. "I want to study veterinary medicine," he explained to his parents. "I love working with the horses, but I want to understand more about animal health and breeding science. The things I can learn at university will make me better able to help the ranch and other operations in the area." Owen and Nora supported his ambition wholeheartedly, proud that their youngest child was pursuing knowledge with such dedication. They made arrangements to pay for his education, a significant expense, but one they could now afford. Thomas left for Denver in the fall of 1903, promising to return home during breaks and to apply everything he learned to the family business. With all three children launched into their adult lives, Owen and Nora found themselves in a new phase of their relationship. They were still busy with the ranch and the school, but there was also more time for just the two of them. They took long rides together across their land, rekindling the easy conversations that had marked the early days of their relationship. They read together in the evenings, discussing books and ideas. They made love with a passion that had matured but never diminished, finding new depths of connection in their physical intimacy. In 1905, when Owen turned 55 and Nora was 49, they decided to take a journey back east. It would be Nora's first return to St. Louis in nearly 30 years, and Owen's first time seeing the city where his wife had grown up. They left James in charge of the ranch and took the train east, marveling at how the journey that had taken Nora weeks of uncomfortable travel now required only a few days in relative comfort. St. Louis had grown enormously since Nora had left, transformed from a large town into a genuine city. She showed Owen the neighborhood where she had lived with her father, the print shop where he had worked, the small cemetery where both her parents were buried. Standing at their graves, with Owen's solid presence beside her, Nora felt a sense of peace. Her parents were gone, but their legacy lived on through her, through the children and grandchildren they would never meet, but who carried their values and dreams forward. They returned to Colorado after 3 weeks, both happy to see the East but happier to be home. The mountains, the vast sky, the clean air that filled their lungs, this was where they belonged. They had been Eastern transplants once, but now they were Westerners through and through, formed and shaped by this landscape and way of life. The final years of the first decade of the 20th century brought more grandchildren. Carrie had 2 daughters in quick succession. James and Sarah added another son, and Thomas, having completed his education and returned home, married a Denver woman named Elizabeth who shared his intellectual interests. The ranch house that had once seemed so spacious now felt wonderfully crowded whenever the family gathered, filled with the noise and chaos and joy of multiple generations. Nora retired from daily teaching in 1908, handing over the school to Ruth Carson, who had been her assistant for many years. But retirement did not mean stopping. Nora still tutored individual students who needed extra help, still opened her home for adult literacy classes, still corresponded with educators across the region, sharing ideas and resources. Education remained her passion, even if she was no longer standing in front of a classroom every day. Owen, too, began to step back from the daily management of the ranch, ceding more control to James and Thomas. The 2 brothers worked well together, combining James's practical business sense with Thomas's scientific approach to breeding and animal husbandry. The operation continued to thrive, adapting to new methods while maintaining the standards of quality that Owen had established decades earlier. On a golden afternoon in October 1910, Owen and Nora sat together on their porch, a position they had occupied countless times over the past 3 decades. They were both in their 60s now, their hair more gray than brown, their faces lined with the evidence of lives fully lived. But their hands were still clasped together, and their eyes still met with the same warmth and understanding that had marked their relationship from the beginning. 32 years, Owen said softly. 32 years since I saw you giving away your dinner to those hungry children. 32 years since I found the courage to invite you to share my table. The best 32 years of my life, Nora said simply. Every moment, even the difficult ones, has been worthwhile because we faced them together. You think those children ever knew? Owen asked. The ones you gave your food to that night. Do you think they ever knew that their hunger and your kindness led to all of this? He gestured at the ranch spreading before them, the house full of family, the life they had built. I doubt they remember, Nora said. They were young and scared and hungry. I was just another face in a difficult time. But maybe that is the point. Small acts of kindness ripple outward in ways we can never predict or measure. Maybe my kindness to them inspired someone else to be kind. Maybe your kindness to me inspired others to take chances on connection and love. I hope so, Owen said. I hope people look at what we have built and feel encouraged to build their own versions. Not copies, but their own unique expressions of partnership and purpose. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and purple, their grandchildren ran across the lawn, their laughter carried on the evening breeze. Inside the house, their children were preparing dinner, multiple generations working together. The school Nora had founded continued to educate children throughout the region. The ranch Owen had built remained prosperous and well regarded. The love they had created together had multiplied and spread, touching more lives than they could count. It was a good life, Owen thought. More than good. It was a life of purpose and meaning, of love freely given and received. And it had all begun with a simple invitation. Come share my table. From that single moment of courage and connection, everything else had flowed. What are you thinking? Nora asked, a question she had asked him hundreds of times over their decades together. I am thinking that I am the luckiest man who ever lived, Owen said honestly. That I saw you sharing your meal with strangers and somehow found the courage to invite you to my table forever. That you said yes. That every day since has been a gift. We are both lucky, Nora corrected gently. But luck is only part of it. We chose each other and then we chose each other again every day after that. We worked to build this life. We forgave each other's failures and celebrated each other's successes. We were partners, equals, always. Always, Owen agreed, raising her hand to his lips and pressing a kiss to her weathered fingers. And forever. Inside the house, someone called them to dinner. Their family was waiting, all the people they had brought into the world or welcomed into their circle. But Owen and Nora sat a moment longer, savoring the peace of the evening and the profound gratitude they both felt for the life they had shared. Then, hand in hand, they rose and walked together into their home, into the warmth and noise and love that filled every corner. Behind them, the sun completed its descent behind the mountains, and stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. And the ranch that had been built on kindness and courage and love continued its quiet work of existing, a testament to what two people could create when they chose to build a life together. The invitation had been extended 32 years ago, and it remained open still. Come share my table, today and tomorrow and all the days after. It was an invitation that had transformed two lives and created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And in the end, that was all anyone could hope for, to love and be loved, to build something meaningful, and to know that the world was better for your having been in it. Owen and Nora had done all that and more. And as they sat down to dinner surrounded by the family they had created, they knew with absolute certainty that every risk, every challenge, every moment of doubt had been worthwhile. They had found each other in a dining hall in a small Colorado town, two strangers taking a chance on connection. And from that fragile beginning, they had built forever.